Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As those of you are just sort of joining and connecting into today's webinar, I just want to welcome you. Today's topic is actually kind of interesting in that there's been a lot of development, obviously, over the last couple of years with Teams. First, of course, was like the pandemic, and people started using Teams a whole lot more because we all had to. But then all this additional functionality around integration with phone systems, Teams calling plan, and now Teams phone. And for organizations like yours, where you're highly reliant on it, there's this issue that revolves around how do we make sure we've got really good performance on it, and what should we do if we don't? And so we're going to take a look at, we sort of tongue-in-cheek call this 5 reasons behind Can You Hear Me Now? And because nobody likes having those phone calls, right? And so we're not necessarily going to go through like here's reason 1, here's reason 2, but we're going to cover 5 different aspects of where there might be problems behind Teams phone call performance issues, and then talk about what you can do to try and isolate those, identify the problems, figure out what you should do about it, and so on. So really kind of excited about today's topic. Today's webinar is actually sponsored by the good folks at Martello, so really happy about that, and we appreciate them doing so. And I am joined today by Richard Ashby. He is a senior architect over at Martello. Richard, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, hi Nick. Thank you very much for the invite. Very excited to join you on this.
Yeah, and it should be a good time here. A couple of housekeeping items for those of you watching. Today's webinar is being recorded. You'll of course get an email afterwards with a link to the recording in case you had to leave early or you want to share it with a colleague, et cetera, et cetera. If you have questions, stick those in the Q&A box. We will take questions at the end. However, this is a sort of a different, if you've never been in our Conversational Geek webinar formats before, it's a very conversational format, thus the name Conversational Geek. And so instead of all just doing questions at the end, I keep the Q&A box open. I try to make sure that I answer questions contextually if they're coming in throughout the webcast. So if you've got a question, a comment, a joke, an anecdote, whatever it is that you'd like to, to offer up, happy to take those, and we'll try to interject you into the conversation as much as we can. Also, just a quick note, this is not a death by PowerPoint presentation. This is, I think there's a total of like 4 or 5 slides, and Richard and I are going to be doing a lot of conversing back and forth. So I want you all, as you're watching, if you don't see the slides advancing while we're talking, it's probably okay. What it means more likely is I really want you to be thinking about the slide deck as being a visual indicator of what we're talking about, as opposed to it has to keep changing as we're talking about something over and over again. So as we go through this, I think you'll kind of get a sense of the flow. And again, if you have questions, stick those in the Q&A box. And Richard, unless you have anything to add, about format, whatnot, we'll just jump right in. Is that all right?
Go for it.
Awesome. So the place we're going to start here is just sort of why Teams phone call quality even matters. And I wanted to kind of start with the fact that you all are even on this webinar. And I have this idea here that when you think about your use of Teams phone and the fact that you're in this webinar, it means, of course, there's a shift in how people are doing business, and they're going to become reliant on that technology. Instead of maybe their cell phones, they're going to start leveraging, maybe it starts with a phone call, we're going to switch over to actually having a meeting, we're going to do some collaboration. It's a shift in, I hate using the word paradigm, it's so old, but you get my point is, at least it starts with the phone call, but those shifts continue here. And then there is that reliance. We need this working. This is how we communicate, whether it's going to be something like a traditional meeting, or in this case, what we're talking about today, a reliance on not just Teams, but the underlying phone technology and the integration points therein, that all those things work. And so we're going to use Teams. We expect all that to work. You think about you and I as just consumers, and Richard as just consumers of any technology. You open up your banking app on your phone. 1, you expect the app to work. 2, you expect to connect. 3, you expect everything to be like just bloop, bloop, just you work and everything responds just like this, right? And it's the same kind of reliance. There's this expectation on the part of your own users that if they're going to use Teams phone, that it's going to work. And then eventually it becomes a necessity. It just becomes part of how we do business, and it becomes the easiest way for me. If I'm gonna make a phone call with someone, I just right click their name in my contacts and I call them on Teams, and it calls me. Oh, great, that's perfectly easy. See, this is a necessity now. Anything other than that becomes kind of a bit of a burden, certainly becomes a lack in productivity. And then there's this aspect of it where, because of the shift, the reliance on the necessity, it becomes as important as meetings. And the thing that when I was thinking about this slide a little bit, I remember years ago, I was VP of marketing for a pretty good sized tech company. And every time we had phone calls, like the president was on, and the VP of sales, and the VP of product management, and I was VP of marketing, and maybe another company we're talking to, and so on. And we're just spending all this time. One of my colleagues, Mike Tierney, would always bring up, he goes, well, this is a pretty expensive phone call. So we should probably get to whatever it is we need to get to. And it was that aspect of, it's a pretty expensive phone call. All of these people on the call, they're making decisions, they have impact in the organization, and it isn't about it's only for VPs or C-levels, but I mean anyone. It's still a pretty expensive phone call if it doesn't work. We're spending our time trying to go, this isn't working, let's shift to another technology, and I'll send everybody links, and we're going to go use something else. That becomes kind of problematic here. So it's pretty important here. And then also, as we'll kind of talk about a little later on today, Microsoft's making some pricing changes here in Teams Phone, which means that there's some added cost just in the licensing. It's not material, like it's a huge amount every month, but it is a cost per user per license. And so that means that if it doesn't work, it's just that much more costly. And Richard, I want to pull you in here. Let's have a little bit of back and forth we could. And I wrote some questions down for myself. And I just wanted to see what you're hearing from customers of Martello around like their increased reliance on Teams Phone, and then maybe how its performance has become more important. Does that resonate? The stuff that I'm talking about here, does it resonate with your customers? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. I think once you start digging in and start talking about Teams Phone and understand why people are adopting it, I think it's as simple the fact that you've got a great cloud communication tool with Teams, but then you've got an archaic, I hate to use the word archaic, telephone system. So bringing the two things together obviously is a great operational sense, but it also makes meetings far more productive. I hear time and time again, oh, we didn't invite so-and-so to this meeting. Hang on, I can call him. Click, click, click. You've brought someone in that may be traveling or that wasn't in. So, I mean, you've become far more effective in your calling. I mean, that does come with challenges, as you said. What was it, 1870s since the first phone call? I mean, 150 years
I wasn't
later.
around. Were you? I don't remember.
Well, no, I think I was thinking about it, but not really there. 150 years later, okay, the telephone system has moved forward, but there's still challenges. We still have areas of the world where you're reliant on someone on a bicycle to go out and put fuel in a generator and make sure the phone system works. I mean, these silly things do impact the service. So again, it's important that the end-to-end performance of Teams Phone is more increased. People rely on it more and more. And it's not just, I think you mentioned it, but it's making sure your meetings, people are engaged in those meetings, people are contributing to it. And I think on your last point about Microsoft making pricing changes, there is a license cost. There's a license cost for Teams. There's a license cost for Teams Phone, but there's also a usage charge for using Teams Phone calling. So, I mean, as you said at the beginning, you want to get value out of that expensive meeting.
It's interesting here, the customers that want to, of course, get to value, the folks that are on this call today, watching us talking, and hopefully be interacting with us a little bit, they're wanting to get the most out of Teams. And just to maybe paint a picture, I'm going to put you on the spot. Hopefully, it's not too bad, but thinking about painting a picture of what does it look like if it goes down. I mean, certainly everybody knows, like, okay, if it's blip, whatever. Yeah, we got to do something, and it cuts a little bit of productivity out and so on. But I'm wondering, do you have an example of a customer where maybe they had the big reliance on Teams Phone and they had something go wrong with performance, and then maybe what the impact was?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there's a customer I was talking to in the Netherlands, and they're a retail customer. They rely heavily on online sales, communicating with their customers and that. And they have this practice once a quarter of bringing the whole team into one location. Not just the people who are doing the calling, but the marketing, the sales, everyone was brought into it. Sort of old fashioned, we get a win, let's all cheer about it. And of course, they had an occasion a couple of months ago where they brought everyone in for 2 hours, and for 15 minutes the phones didn't work. They couldn't call. I mean, that has a direct impact on the productivity. Not only the fact they couldn't call people, but the fact is they'd invested a lot of money by bringing people to site. So, I mean, these people were pretty stressed about that occasion.
I'd imagine so. Yeah, that obviously that has an impact, and that's a pretty expensive meeting. Flow
Yeah.
everybody in, and that costs like they want it to work. I'm wondering, for those of you in the audience here, I'm going to put a poll up on the screen here. And it's just, how frequently is your org experiencing specifically Teams phone issues? And you just interact with the screen. I'm just wondering, you've got daily, weekly, monthly, not at all. I'm assuming that you all are having some kinds of issues, or you've been charged with making sure that you don't, one or the other, or maybe a little both. And so go ahead and just interact with the screen, and click on your answer, and we're going to show you the results and see where people are at. And Richard, while we're waiting for, because I see like right now, GoToWebinar says it's distributing the poll. What do you think is going to be, sort of the primary answer here that we're going to see?
Oh, that's putting me on the spot. My instinct
Yes.
says
Yeah.
my instinct says weekly, but I wouldn't surprise, or I'd be interested to see how many people say not at all. So I'll go for weekly, but let's see what not at all comes up with.
Okay, fair enough. I get to cheat because I can see the poll in real time. So like, well, I think the answer is going to be, and I'm always going to be right, so it doesn't work that way. We got about 60% of you have voted. I'm gonna wait another like 5 seconds or something. I'm gonna close this thing out. And you're kind of spot on in your. I'm gonna share the results out here for everybody. In looking at this, that weekly was a very high contender here in comparison to daily and monthly. It was number one, but not at all still like well over a third of people are not having issues. I'm actually curious, the 35% of you that said not at all, if you just stick in the Q&A box, I'm just wondering, this will sound wrong, but I'm just asking the question, why are you here? Then what do you want to get out of this? Is it more we're trying to be proactive, we don't think we're experiencing problems, or we're going to be increasing reliance? I'm just some context would really be helpful, because it also helps Richard and I in our conversations to try and steer towards the stuff that you're trying to do. So if there's a reason there, that would be kind of cool if you would do that, and that would just be helpful. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll out, and we'll continue on with the slides. But as you put in, maybe type in some reasons here of why you're here. If any of you do that, I'll be happy to just to sort of read those out here. Now, so I think everybody obviously understands the call quality matters, performance matters, and so I want to talk about sort of an end-to-end perspective at what's impacting Teams phone call quality. We, again, tongue-in-cheek, called this, Greg says, by the way, he's being proactive. So, okay, Greg is probably, a bunch of you are trying to do the same thing in the same boat as Greg, being proactive. Something might happen. And that's what we're talking even on this slide. This is to be very proactive. We want you to get a full spectrum of where the problem is. When we tongue-in-cheek said that whole, can you hear me now? Everyone sort of typically would go, it's a problem with Teams. And whenever I hear that, I laugh, because I remember when I first got into IT, and that's, oh boy, it's like 30 years ago. If any of you go as far back as I do, just really quick on a side note, totally unrelated, my first server was a NetWare 2.2 server on a 286 running in non-dedicated mode. And there's like 2 of you that went, oh, cool. And the rest of you are like, what are you talking about, dude? And that's okay. Anyways, I digress. All right, so back to our regularly scheduled program here. But when I first started, and the internet finally kind of came around somewhere in the late 90s, and we had a T1 line, 1.44 megabits out to the internet and so on. The big joke was when people would go, hey, the internet's down. They'd call the help desk, the internet's down. And I always go, like, you're qualified, some user, you're qualified to tell me that the internet's down. Yeah, you would know for sure. They don't. And it sort of has that same kind of air of like, Teams isn't working. How do you know? It's not Teams. Everyone sort of blames Microsoft, is the point. And yet, when you look at this sort of end-to-end perspective, on the left side, we've got this little sort of user head over here in the middle upper left. And on the upper middle right, we have the Teams logo, just to represent all the Teams stuff. But there's stuff in between that has to happen there. If you look at this, you have things that are very specific to the user, You have things like, if you look here, like, maybe their machine is having performance problems. Maybe they've got some rogue process they didn't realize that's running at 100% CPU utilization, slowing everything down, or their Wi-Fi connection's terrible because they're on the wrong side of the house because today their kids are home and they had to go down in the basement, or whatever, right? And then the internet connection, the handset, and you can read down this list yourself. I'm not going to cover all these bullets, but then you look at like the organization, and Microsoft has very specific recommendations for the architecture of how organizations connect their users to the Microsoft 365 cloud. The general consensus is basically direct. That's the answer. And don't run anything for security. If they have to go through the organization, don't do a lot of hairpin network turns and routing. Don't put security solutions in on yours. Do it in the cloud. Our stuff is optimized. That's kind of their position. But you also have the ISP, the exit point from the organization, if you have to get between the organization and Microsoft Cloud. There are like accelerators that exist where they can put one at your organization, and then they already have the other end existing in the cloud, and they can compress the traffic and make it really fast, but not everybody has that. So there's a lot of in that ISP kind of section here. And then if you are using some kind of phone network with Teams Phone, presumably, and I put PSTN here in air quotes because you may or may not be using like twisted pair wiring. I don't know, but I just meant the public switch telephone network to represent the phone company, the cell phone company, whoever it is, and then all of the components therein. In some cases, it's the Teams components specific to phone calling, like direct route air calling plan or things like that. But then also the telephony that's involved, the session border controllers, all those things that have to be working in harmony in order to make that work. And then we finally get on the right, all the stuff in the Microsoft Cloud. But it's not just Teams, it's I included the apps. That was just second from the bottom there. And typically you go, it's over at the user. I mean, it is. It's at the user, but it's not anything the user controls. Microsoft controls whether that works or doesn't work. There's a problem with that version or not. But then authentication into the cloud, the routing internal inside of the Microsoft environment, all that. And all of these things can impact the Teams phone call. And this becomes kind of a very broad and yet very deep set of things that you have to be able to either monitor, be able to troubleshoot, to look at, isolate, dismiss, whatever it is, so that you can figure out, the problem is actually one of these things. And this isn't even an exhaustive list. I mean, Richard, would you agree, just really quickly, this isn't an exhaustive list of everything it could be. I've just tried to go hit the high points for each of these sort of categories. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We could go on for hours and hours at the possibilities on there, but I mean, let me just add a couple on top of that. Bring your own device to work. Is it compatible? People, you get the impression that people are remote from the office, then they sort of can use what they want, but at the end of the day, they need to have something that is compatible. Microsoft, I know we say it's not typically Microsoft, but Microsoft do make changes. They update software. They change parameters. And are you keeping up to date with these? Again, that's another impact you can have there. And I like the PSTN part of this as well. The SBC, the session border controller, that gateway between the cloud world and the telephony world is so important. It's not just translating one language into another, it's acting as a firewall, a gatekeeper, and that. So understanding if that SBC is actually doing the job it's meant to. And of course, lots of people go to third-party suppliers for the SBC. So again, you're looking at whether it's Microsoft, whether it's your ISP, whether it's your third-party supplier, whether it's your telephony supplier, items that are definitely out of your control. And do you really get full visibility of those in when you're examining your team's performance?
And there's another interesting aspect about this how I've got these sort of columns named user, organization, ISP, PSTN, and Microsoft. Those are the individuals or entities, as the case would be, of who's going to be responsible to fix it. There's a problem. And in fact, I'm going to go on a slightly different tangent, Richard. Let's talk about this from your perspective when you're talking to customers today, because Martell has a huge bunch of visibility into all this stuff. And how much of this is, because this could be a lot of fun, like, it's all going to be wrong, and maybe nothing ever happens in the organization. It's always Microsoft, and we're making this up as we go along. So how much of this is FUD, and how much this is really, is it Microsoft? Is it not Microsoft? Is there like a I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there a percentage of time it's usually Microsoft that you guys see, or could you even make up a stat on the spot? Because 58.7% of all stats are made up on the spot. Anyways, I just made that up. And but what's your thought there? Is it Microsoft most of the time? Is it mostly the stuff in the other 4 columns that I've got here?
Really put on the spot. I would say Microsoft is well below 10%. I think
Okay.
they are a minor there. If you want to put me on a number, I would say something like local network is probably the highest one.
Mm.
Probably over 60% of issues are with bandwidth or Wi-Fi, local firewalls, office infrastructure. I would say that's where I put my money.
And then are there some, we already agree this isn't an exhaustive list, but are there some, I'll call them the not so obvious, sort of sources of Teams phone call quality issues and performance issues that our audience wouldn't necessarily, it would take them a long time to identify. Let's put it that way. Are there some here that maybe it's not even on this list? It could be something else even, but what are those not so obvious, gotchas that would take a while to figure out what it is and what the source is?
I think it just comes down, the obvious one is where communication breaks up. It becomes garbled or it becomes robotic and that. And I mean, it may pass, it may just last 5 seconds, but if it's the boss of the company, you'll make sure that that 5 seconds comes to your attention. And where do you start with something like that? It's garbled, it's happened, it's gone. The rest of the call is okay. But there is a problem out there, and that's your starting point. And what's your path to resolve it?
It's a good point. There's a stat that I had read for those of you, the 35% of you that said you're not having any Teams phone call issues, and a couple of you said you're being proactive. Greg was one, I think it was Chris was another one, said, oh, just being proactive, just trying to make sure. The stat is only 16% of users actually call the help desk if they're having problems. And if you think about that, it's probably because, like Richard, it's that scenario you just mentioned, which is it was and then it stopped and it was fine. And even if that happens every day, literally every call or once a day or something for a user, it cleared up and they don't know to go, hey, there's a problem somewhere and somebody needs to fix this because it's not impacting them materially enough for them to go stop this. And
Yeah.
and people just sort of put up with it and assume, oh, that's just the Starbucks Wi-Fi or wherever they're connected to or something, as opposed to it's a real problem with the architecture and how we connect people to the Microsoft network. I mean, do you experience that sometimes with customers?
Yeah, and going back to your poll there, and the reason I said I'd be interested to see how many people said not at all. Now, I appreciate people are out there proactive. Greg, for example, is proactive, but at the end of the day, if your user's not complaining, if they're not raising tickets, you don't have visibility. And I mean, users are not IT experts. They can't give you a definitive description of what the problem is. Oh, I was talking to so ago, and I think it was this. So, yeah, trying to deal with that sort of issue or that sort of report, trying to see if other people are suffering the same issue. These are the sort of challenges, which of course then makes me think, well, 35% of people of not seeing issues is not a surprise.
Interesting here. So let's take another survey for those of you in the audience here. I want to ask basically for those that you have had problems, how long did it take you to identify and troubleshoot it? And we just made this pretty simple: minutes, hours, days, and some issues are never resolved. And you can pick one. So if some issues are never resolved, what I'm kind of meaning by that fourth one is like it's not minutes, hours, and days. We just don't resolve them. We don't know. We tried to look at it. We can't figure it out. So think of that fourth one as like we've never been able to solve it, which is probably not everyone's going to pick that, or maybe no one will pick that. But if nothing else, what represents best how long it takes you to identify and troubleshoot? And for those of you that picked, you're not having any Teams phone issues right now. How about any other Teams problems that you're having? That way everyone can still participate. It doesn't have to be just Teams phone, but we're talking about Teams phone for the most part. But for those of you that don't, go ahead and answer anyways. But Richard, again, what's your thought here? What do you think we're going to see here as the primary answer? How long it takes to troubleshoot a problem?
Well, if you only give me one answer, I would say hours. But again, just because I said about how people report issues, how people get response from third-party suppliers and that. I think there'll still be a big number in some issues are never resolved. So apologies, Nick. I have to sit on the fence here. I'll go for hours, but again, I want to see this fourth option, how many people tick that one.
You're making me laugh because you're not being indecisive, but yeah, Emmanuel says it's not easy to answer. Depends from issue to issue. Totally agree. So just you pick
Absolutely.
something that best represents, and you just go with it. And I know that it was obviously we couldn't be like between 3 and 7 minutes, between 8 and 12. I mean, no one wants to take that survey. So pick one of the 100 options. So apologies, Emmanuel. We're just trying to make this as super easy as possible here. So I've got about half of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And once again, Richard, you're a rock star. Ours is number one here. 19% said some issues are never resolved. At one point, it was up to like 30%, and then obviously more people answered, and it drops down a bit. But it doesn't surprise me the hours. I'd be kind of interested. I want to talk to you about this and ask you about if there's any surprises here, especially that fourth one. But before I ask you that, Richard, for those of you in the audience here, I'm just sort of wondering, like for those issues that never get resolved or something takes hours, what is this? It's like for one person, or is this more like the one person says, "Oh, the phone broke up" and whatever, and then people just spin their wheels trying to solve this one person's issue, or is it more like we have an entire Teams meeting room and $15,000 worth of AV equipment, and we have to make sure that room works? And was it like something that's going to materially impact the organization? Was it for one person? Is it across the board? You answer all of those and you try to solve every single one of them. Just paint a picture for me. What does that look like? Is it for per individual, or are you doing this? Is it does it more characteristic for your organization that you're trying to deal with bigger issues when like the CEO yells and screams, or there's a very expensive meeting and we're trying to make sure that works? So, and while we're waiting for you to see if some comments come in, Richard, any surprises here? I mean, were you thinking hours would be more than it is? Are you thinking that some issues that never resolved would be more than it is? What's your thought?
Actually, I'm surprised days is as high as it is. I have a shudder goes down my back if it's taking people days to actually resolve issues. And while you're asking the question, or I'll ask the question, those that put days, why is it so long? Is it because you're unable to get the response, unable to understand the problem, or is it simply you send it, you think it's one source and they either don't respond to you or they take a long time to come back? So I'd be interested also by the people who voted for days.
Yeah, so no comments have come in yet, but if any of you that have answered want to just put something in there, give us some context, we'd love to have that and just include that in on our conversation today. All right, so let me go ahead and let's go back to the slide deck here and talk about troubleshooting Teams phone issues. And I want to look at this from Microsoft's perspective first, and actually provide you some pretty good resources that will help you. And I'm going to try and steer you kind of in the right direction. Keep in mind that on a webcast, in an hour, we can't teach you how to troubleshoot, and everything that's involved. And so sometimes when I look at these webcasts, when I deliver them, I'm thinking this more as an educational opportunity, just to get you to like stop and focus on the problem that you're trying to solve, and then talk about some direction you can go in, and then you can run with it and figure out how you're going to do it. Because if we said, the answer, just paint everything purple and it'll be fine. I mean, you can't. There's like, there's not one simple answer. You just throw a swath of whatever across it, and then that solves everybody's problem here. But there are some similarities here. So the first thing is I want to point out is Microsoft, when you're looking at how they suggest you troubleshoot Teams phone issues, there are a number of solutions to be involved. So there's a number of different areas within the Teams admin center that are going to come into play. You will have actually some things you'll be doing on the Teams client themselves. And then the connectivity tool that they have, which exists just to test out, they have the user test out and see what their connection looks like. And so there's a number of tools that you'll want to be using here. And what I want to do is I want to bring back that little graphic here of the person through Teams, if you will. I'm not going to bring up the 5 blocks again, but I did kind of look at Microsoft's process, and I positioned, going back, if you think back, a slide where we had from left to right, so for you guys, user, organization, ISP, PSTN, and Microsoft. and you think about those left to right, the first thing they suggest you're going to do is you're going to check the phone number assignment. Do that in the Teams admin center just to make sure it's a team-centric thing, but you make sure, do they even have like the right assigned phone number? Is the basics, are they even correct? And that's actually built in Microsoft's, it's a help desk guide that they have, and there's a short URL there. It is case sensitive, at least the latter half of it there, all in capital letters. That's basically the letters of that Microsoft Teams phone help desk guide. And they start with the phone assignment. Oh, I take that back. This is actually, I have some animation out of order here. Also within that guide is another link, which we've short URL'd for you, which is a troubleshooting guide. And that's what I'm covering here. So the help desk guide is a bit bigger. And then inside of that, they link to the troubleshooting guide. I thought I'd just bring it to your attention here. You guys can take a look at that URL. They both link back. The first one links right to the PDF, this guide. The second one links to a Microsoft knowledge base page that you can look. But they start with the phone assignment. And then they go and they start looking at client issues. That'll be the second thing. So once you've verified at least their basic configuration for Teams Phone works, let's double check that the client works. And there are a couple of steps there to make sure the client is functional, appropriately configured, and so on. And then there's this question of call failure and call quality. So using the call quality dashboard inside the Teams admin center. And I kind of put it somewhere in the middle. It's sort of like, maybe it's the organization, maybe it sort of has to do with the user's own environment, maybe it has to do with the ISP, I'm not sure. But I stuck it over here kind of to the left because we're just talking about what's their experience sort of from an end-to-end perspective. Yes, we're doing it in Teams Admin Center, but the idea is the part of this spectrum of stuff that can go wrong. It's sort of everywhere in between, but really we're kind of more interested. We're, Microsoft, and we're making the assumption that Teams is working, but you'd be looking to see what else is having an issue there. And then we look at direct routing. Are we having a good interaction with the session border controllers? Are we having any issues there? And that's a little closer to the PSTN side, so I moved it to the right. And then you've got any devices that might come into play. Headsets can actually screw everything up as well, and that can come into play. And then also looking to see if meetings are having a similar issue for this user to just identify, is it them? Is it not them? Is it something to do just with the phone call? Because if it's with meetings as well, then you go, oh, okay, this is not a PSTN issue. It's something between like the user's environment and the ISP, or it's Microsoft, one of the two. And so Microsoft, as you go through these steps in a logical sequence to try and help sort of isolate where the problem is and also peel away the onion at the same time to maybe go with, this is my own opinion, but kind of going like with most common, and starting bigger picture and working your way down to the detail. So that's where we start with, does the phone number, is it right? Is the client up and running? Can they even connect and do other things in Teams? Okay, let's look at the call failure. Are they having lots of call failures? Having one call failure? And you see you're just unpeeling this onion and digging deeper and deeper into it here. Richard, I'm wondering here, for you, how much does this sort of process, and of course the audience doesn't have to follow this exactly, it's just how Microsoft is trying to organize it to make it a best practice, but it's up to the organizations themselves and also based off of what the user says is wrong, those kinds of things, and they troubleshoot that way. But when Martello's recommending a process for your customers to go through, does it not directly line up with this, but is it close? Are you starting the same way where you're peeling the onion? Do you have a slightly different onion that you're peeling? I mean, what does it look like?
I think our focus is on user experience. So obviously call failure, call quality is number one for us. Do we unpeel an onion? We have one click to unpeel the onion, and then our approach is to make all the information readily available.
Now you're just bragging.
Yes, absolutely. But the one thing that I noticed, I also went through this. I did this course a couple of days ago just to understand the process, and it's all reaction. It's not. You're relying on a user to have a poor experience, and then it's reacting to that, and then going through the phone assignment, etc., etc. Which, as I said previously, that concerns me, because if you do get a user report it in 16% of the time, what's the sort of information? It's very difficult to start in that sort of muddled frame of mind and then pick up a determined path. So there are definitely call failure, devices, client issues, direct routing, meetings. Absolutely, we factor all those things in, perhaps not in the same order as Microsoft, but to me, the one bit missing is visibility without the user.
It's an interesting perspective here because when you said you have to wait for the user experience to be poor, and then we start troubleshooting the problem. And it's funny because basically it's like the fact that the user has to have a bad experience is actually in and of itself kind of a bad experience. Like that's how this gets fixed. Is it has to suck for them, and then they have to wait longer while it sucks for them.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting perspective when you talk about being able to proactively deal with this. And I don't it's actually kind of interesting because I want to talk about this a little bit because I am familiar with Martello's product, but I'm not here to pitch it by any means. But normally Richard's spot on because normally those of you in the audience, you have to wait until the data's there. But if there was a way to be able to, for example, be alerted that something isn't working before users ever got to the office. So let's say a session border controller isn't functioning beforehand at 5 in the morning before anyone ever gets there, or there's a problem with the ISP at a particular location and it can't connect to Teams. Those kinds of things, it's still technically there's, in this case, not someone, but something having a problem doing sort of interacting and synthetically acting as a user to notify the help desk, the service desk, whatever you happen to have, that there's a problem, but then at least you can do something about it beforehand and you don't have to wait. Rob actually says that reactive approach is a huge problem. Rob says that reactive approach is a huge problem in identifying issues. Few people report issues and the tools are limited. Not everyone is a Teams admin. So issues get in ticketing systems and may take a bit to get assigned to a Teams admin, which by the time the call meeting or whatever is already over. It's a good point. It's like it's almost like I say, it doesn't matter at that point, but it's like it's really hard to need to troubleshoot it. And also, you don't know if it is a bigger issue or is everyone having the problem? Because if 16% of people only do it, that means there's 1 in 5, or roughly speaking, a little more than 1 in 5 are actually reporting something. So is it 5 times as big of an issue? And what happens if it's somebody who's a bigwig in the company or whatever? But what's also interesting here is, Richard, is that I think that the Microsoft perspective, thinking back to sort of the end-to-end visibility that I think is necessary in order to truly troubleshoot a Teams phone issue, there's what I'm going to call contextual perspective that's missing, where you don't get to see like how long has this been going on. Like by example of something went down at 5 in the morning that impacts an entire office and nobody knows it until the very first user makes a phone call. And the presumption, I think all of you in the audience would probably agree with me if you worked on the help desk, and probably hopefully not all of you do, but if you did, and one person called in the morning and said, I'm having a problem with Teams phone, your assumption is probably going to default to it's just this one person until you get the wave of phone calls coming in because you have no contextual perspective. So, Richard, the question I wrote down here was, what are some of those other sort of contextual perspectives that are missing from the Microsoft approach here that would actually help troubleshoot Teams phone issues?
I think I could summarize that in three key steps. I mean, the Microsoft collect a wealth of data. I mean, it's amazing the level of data they collect, and it's not the easiest place to go and search and get the information you want. And as you said, is it one user? Is it multiple users? Is it the whole office? Is it the whole town that's being impacted by an outage? So the ability to continually gather that data from Microsoft, group it, portray the issues, notify people when there's a problem, but enhance that, as you said, with the proactive testing. Don't rely on your users. Let's try and take the end users out of the equation. Let's use the ability to test the Teams applications 24 hours a day, understand if they're performing, and then build that into your proactive detection. So you've not only got the user's experience, so you can see those patterns, but you're actually actively going out there and looking for them. And I'll just give you one little scenario that it demonstrates that really. You have a meeting that starts at 2 o'clock and finishes at 3 o'clock. Halfway through, someone has a problem. They've got the distorted voice or that, and there's a notification that says it's a network issue. So you're at 1:30 at this point. but you don't know where to go. You send it to your local engineer. He says, it's not me. You send it to your ISP. By the time you've even got a chance of resolving it, the meeting is finished, you're long gone. Let's say you're proactively testing, and at 1 o'clock, you detect a problem. You've then got an hour to fix that problem before that meeting's impacted. So that's one of the important points of using the proactive testing. But detection is one thing, presenting the information in a way that is easily digestible, that helps you with clear indications of where the potential problems are, even pinpointing where the failure could be on that connection between the end user and Microsoft, saves you so much time. You're not finger pointing. You can go direct to the company or the person responsible to resolve that. So again, your resolution, your time to get people involved and for those people to resolve comes down at the end of the day. But for me, the real wraparound to this is, with these tools, constant visibility, the ability to pinpoint where problems are, the proactive testing allows you to sort of always optimize. You're continually driving up. You can measure what you're doing, put SLAs in place so you can see the performance increase. So if you put those three principles together, that circle, you're always ahead of the user. If the user does suffer, you can see if it's a single problem or multiple problems. So it's all about visibility, early detection, but the tools to be able to do without the real user at the end of the day.
I would really agree here, because it's very tough to just reactively, and especially when beyond the whole idea, like the user's no longer on the meeting anymore. They're no longer on the meeting whether you can test it again. It's like you can't reproduce it necessarily, but if they were on and you could keep testing over and over again, then and otherwise you have to take their time to, can you get another call and call somebody else and take up somebody else's time? Makes no sense, right? So it becomes a problem here. Now I know you've got a couple of slides you wanted to show that cover your product. And so I'm going to go ahead and give you some time to do that, and we'll go through those slides together. And then for those in the audience here, we're still taking questions. If you have any questions while Richard's talking about Martello's product, which won't take very long, we'll be happy to answer those questions at the end as well. So feel free to stick those in the Q&A box. And with that, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. So what I want to show you here is just basically one screen within our product Vantage DX. Now this is looking at locations. We have similar screens for users and for meeting rooms, but the information is similar in each case. So you can see, we always know what the performance is, what the good call rate in this particular location. Importantly, we split out who's connecting from the office as opposed to who's connecting remotely. Why is that important? Obviously, you've invested more money in the office infrastructure. If you're having problems there, you're obviously going to impact multiple users. On the second row, you can see how people are connecting, whether it's wired, whether it's mobile broadband, whether it's Wi-Fi, types of calls they're making. We also get an indication of whether people are using VPN. We all know that Microsoft says, do not use VPN for Teams, bypass it. So if people are, say, connecting from a mobile device and they're coming in by VPN, it's a potential to impact the level of service they're getting on Teams. Again, Teams client. We saw quite a few changes when Microsoft introduced the latest Teams client over the classic client. Again, being able to understand what your end user using, Android, iOS, Mac, web client, is all important. So again, it's exposing information that is giving you a clear picture. If we just drop down and look at the network connections, you can see instantly which ISPs you're using. In this case, we're using a couple, and you can see a differing performance between these two ISPs. And then one bit that I do really like is that so often individuals use their own devices, whether it's audio and video. We know Microsoft certifies certain of these devices for compatibility with Teams, but there are also a lot of devices, audio and video devices out there that are not certified. The advantage with this is say, for example, you detected a problem with a certain device, it's simply a single click and you can see all your users that are using that device, and you can work to fix it, replace it, whatever the necessary it is. We all remember, oh, I think we all take part in IT surveys when they write out to you and say, can you tell me what your laptop is? Can you tell me what your device is, etc., etc. The return rate on that is very poor. So again, it's all about giving you back control of your end user's experience. And now if we drop down and look at the PSTN or the Teams phone part of it, I mean, this has become more and more critical over the last 12 months. Microsoft certainly made a big move into the telephony, this communicating, cloud into telephony world. And of course, that produced additional challenges. Irrespective of the type of Teams phone you're using, whether it's direct routing, calling plan, operator connect, mobile connect, we've got that information. We can detect which particular calling plans are having more issues or not. But the block on the second row on the right-hand side is also portraying the SBC failure codes. So it's not necessarily a poor experience for an end user. It may be the SBC is rejecting because it's a code 403. The user is not authorized to use Teams phone. So again, it's a frustration to the end user, and it's not really a performance failure, but it gives you visibility of the end user experience. And last but not least, we always capture the last 50 calls. And here we're looking at locations. If I was looking at a users, you would have far more information about IP addresses, private IP addresses, network parameters, performance of the device, etc. But here, of course, you can clearly see if the problem is down to the network, or in this case, we've highlighted one that's PSTN. So this is just one dashboard in our solution that brings all that information together. And we've talked about experience, but let me just talk about cost or licenses. And if we just jump to the next screen, one of the things we see critical is, especially as Microsoft has unbundled Teams, is that more and more people are paying for or are buying phones licenses. So it's an additional investment on top of their already expensive investment in Microsoft. So it becomes even more critical to understand how many licenses you've got, what type of licenses, are they assigned, and at the bottom, are they actually being used? You have a real cost-saving opportunity here. And I think Microsoft, keep me honest, Nick, I think Microsoft posted something about a 25% increase in
$8 to 10, from $8 to $10. So that's a 25% increase. Yeah.
So yeah, it becomes even more essential that you track your licenses, and are they really being used? Are you really getting value out of a single person or a group of people having those Teams licenses? So those were the two areas I just wanted to drop on there. If the next screen, I believe there's, if you want to get more information, if you want to book a demo, here's a QR code. We've just scraped the surface here, and of course, I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you. But of course, I'll pass it back to Nick now, and let's pick up a few of those questions.
Yeah, there's at least one in here, but if you're typing some in, go right ahead. But I actually want you to talk about one other thing first, a little bit more from the perspective of your product. You talked about, we had a conversation about being proactive and knowing ahead of time, when users aren't even around. Would you talk about the synthetic transactions in your product? I think that's just a very interesting technology, and explain to them what you're actually doing behind the scenes so that they get a bit of context around where does not, you're not just like pulling data from CQD and sticking it into a different chart. There's a lot more that goes into your technology. Talk about the synthetic transactions for a second, how that works.
Absolutely, and actually at the bottom of the locations under the PSTN, you would have seen all the results of those, but we didn't pull them up there. So yeah, we offer proactive testing. It's a robot that you can deploy in your environment. It's a small very insignificant piece of Windows software that you can deploy. And what that robot does is actually use a real user account. So they are based on an account, the same as I have, the same as Nick have, the same as you do. So when a robot performs its workloads, those synthetic transactions, it's doing it exactly the same as you and I would do. So one typical workload would be a Teams workload where you're connecting to Teams, you're checking instant messaging, you may be uploading, downloading files, etc., checking presence. So that's just one, but then there's audio to audio, video to video. There's Teams phone proactive testing, the rest of the Microsoft 365 applications. Each one of those is a different workload. As Nick said, run 24 hours a day, irrespective of whether a user is using the system or not. The robots are working just like users, and they're testing. And obviously, if the tests fail, you're instantly notified of those. And I should say, before I pass it back to you, Nick, one robot will do all those tests. You don't need a different robot for testing Teams phone as opposed to Teams meeting rooms, etc.
Yeah, it's actually interesting about this technology is the idea. I put my IT practitioner hat on, and for those of you thinking about wanting to be able to test to see if things are working, this is like you put a bot on, let's say that's connecting via your Wi-Fi, one that's connected via your hardwired networking, one in every location. This kind of thing, so that you have using them as a means of testing out to the granularity level that you want, so that you can isolate where the problem is. So, for example, if you had one of these per location, and your company has 50 locations around the world, go just run with it. Then you'd be able to tell, gee, it looks like we're having a problem with the 3 locations we have in EMEA. Oh, and they all use the exact same ISP. I'm starting to see a connection here. Maybe it's the ISP. Yeah, and that kind of thing. So it just helps isolate down the problem, because you're doing this proactively as opposed to waiting for people to come in, and you could do something again about it beforehand. So it's a very cool technology there. Right now I only have one question in the queue. It's from Emmanuel again, and Emmanuel's asking, what's the source of the graphs that you showed? Is it CQD? And so maybe you could talk a little bit about where that data comes from.
Yeah, great question there. CQD is one of the sources that we use, but there is a number of sources or a number of data sets that Microsoft collect regarding Teams interaction, and also meeting rooms, etc. So Call Quality Dashboard is one source, but then we have Service Health, we have Teams Meeting Room Pro, we have Teams Admin, etc. So we pull all that information together, we correlate it to give you the graphics there.
Excellent. And it looks like there are no other questions. If you're still typing a question in, go ahead, finish it. We'll try and slip it in before we end things off. But before we sign off today, Richard, any final thoughts before we close things out?
No, I mean, it's very interesting to come out, and obviously, Nick, it's great to have a conversation with you, and it express the sort of things that I hear day in, day out. I have the pleasure of talking to many customers across the world, so I get quite a good picture of the issues, the challenges, and also the successes that people have. So it's wonderful to spare a few minutes of my time to share that sort of information with you, and obviously the people have joined this webinar. So thank you very much for the invite, Nick, and thank you everyone who has joined.
It was an honor to have you today. Hey, everyone, thanks for joining us today. Hope this was educational. Hope you got something out of it. We're going to give you, I think, 5 minutes back of your day. So enjoy that as well. Thanks for joining us. Oh, wait, Emmanuel did ask one other question, and I told you I would slip it in if I could. What about the graphs viewed in the session? The source is that CQD. I think that they're talking about the renderings on the dashboard. Are those graphs, those are generated by Martello Vantage DX, right?
Correct, yes. Okay. It's part of our product, yes.
Very good. All right, so we got our answers there. If you're still typing a question, go ahead and put it in there. Someone from Martello reach out to you directly and get your question answered. But thanks everyone for watching today. I hope you learned something. And this is going to conclude today's webcast. So thanks a lot. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
All right.